So in my previous build video, I went over an incredibly strong endgame speed farming build for the Druid. Now that version of this build was more focused on farming like Torment 1 to 8, and this version is going to be more specified around specifically farming Torment 10. So this is essentially the version 2 of that build, and while I do think I can make a version of this build that can actually do Torment 12 and do most content on that, I think Torment 10 is really the sweet spot in the game right now. Going up to Torment 11 and Torment 12 doesn't give any big bonuses, and the last big bonus is on Torment 10. So if you really only care about making your character stronger and getting more loot, Torment 10 is definitely the best place to be farming, and this build is incredibly strong for Torment 10, especially anything you're doing that you're facing big groups of enemies, because you could just destroy things off screen with this build. And to start off, we have to go over our Talisman because we need the 2 set of this set for the build to actually work, which storm skills no longer cost spirit to cast. That's a primary thing for the build to actually work. We have a bunch of storm skills that are all using spirit, so this just makes them not cost spirit. But on top of that, anytime you use a storm skill, it'll consume all of your spirit to give you a damage boost, which increases per spirit consumed up to 75%, so it'll be a big damage increase. Then the 3 set Cyclone Armor is now free, meaning we specifically get the passive bonus of Cyclone Armor even when it's not on our bar, which will be a big defensive increase. And then Cyclone Armor grants a damage reduction just at all times, and it'll automatically trigger when enemies hit you. So we just get Cyclone Armor for free, and it doesn't have to be on our bar, giving us a pretty massive damage reduction at all times. And then the 5 set, storm skills have a 20% chance to double cast and a 5% chance to triple cast. When they double cast, it gets a massive damage bonus. When they triple cast, it gets even a bigger damage bonus. So some pretty big damage bonuses, but the 2 set is what you need for the build to actually work. If you want to get into Torment 10 though, you're definitely going to need the 5 set. And then for our seal, we're considering not you having a mythic seal, which most people don't. The primary thing you want is just a legendary seal that unlocks 6 charm slots. I could get a much better rolled seal with a pretty big damage increase if I could get the other roll to be for the Storm Shepherd set. This does have a 10% crit chance, which is actually a very nice roll for this. And then for our final charm slot, we have a Dirge of Erudite, which storm skills you cast grant 1 spirit and deal up to 35% increased damage. These bonuses are doubled when hitting a vulnerable enemy, which will be at all points. I do also need much better rolls on this so I could get some pretty big stat increases there. And then that brings us to our skill tree, and one of the big parts of this build is having multiple skills that are passive toggle on skills that normally would be costing spirit, but because none of our skills cost spirit, they're just passive damage that are always going on. It will proc a bunch of additional effects and deal damage. The first one is a Lightning Storm. Usually it's a channeled skill that builds up a Lightning Storm, but when we take the Hero of the Storm variant, Lightning Storm can now be toggled passively and travels with you. Deals some amount of base damage and will be maintained as long as you have enough spirit. And this turns this into a toggle, so you just toggle it off, toggle it off. Since this is a storm skill, it won't cost any spirit at all, so you turn this on, it'll infinitely be on unless you like go to a new area or mount up or something like that. But in combat, it will always just stay on and it can never turn off, so it'll just be doing damage. And like the normal Lightning Storm, it will build up its storm and just stay at the max storm since it's always being cast. And then for the top upgrade, you could choose either of these. You have additional strikes, which you gain 1 additional lightning strike, and you gain even more for your stacks of ferocity. We will have stacks of ferocity, so this is more so better for AoE or much larger bosses. Like if you're doing a world boss that's massive, all of these additional strikes will hit. If it's like a smaller single target, all of your strikes will not hit, so you can actually take the other, which is damage bonus. Lightning Storm's damage is increased by 10%, 25% if they're vulnerable, so it'll always be 25%. This will be better for single target. More lightning strikes will be better for bigger bosses and specifically AoE. Then for the bottom one, we are not taking movement speed. The size of your Lightning Storm is preserved, which really doesn't matter. It just gives us increased movement speed while our Lightning Storm is active, so it's just a movement speed increase at all times. Minimum strikes will make this start faster, but this really doesn't matter since this will always be on, so it'll grow to its max size very quickly. Also, if you don't need move speed, you could actually take this point out and just have another point to put into skill upgrades for some of our other skills. Then we have the main ability that we are spamming. It is also going to be building up our damage bonus from our tier set. This is going to be Shred. It gives us a bunch of movement, and it's a 3 attack combo that does some pretty decent damage. It's not going to be our main damage, but it's adding a decent amount of damage, and this procs a bunch of other effects that just buff us in other ways. For the variant, we turn it into a storm skill, so it doesn't cost anything, so we can always use it, and it does bonus damage. It also scales with all of our other storm or lightning skill damage. For the left upgrade, cast speed is increased, so we can just use it more. The right upgrade, which is quite important, is Shred will now grant us Berserking, and this will extend the duration anytime we use Shred. Berserking is a 25% damage bonus and movement speed increase, so it's a pretty big multiplicative damage increase that we also just get at all times from Shred, so quite good. Then we're going over, we are using 3 defensives, and this will make a bit more sense as we go into it. 2 of these are going to be on our bar. First one, Earthen Bulwark, we are going to be proccing this through one of our runes, which will constantly be proccing. This is just a big barrier. The variant we're using is Earthen Bulwark, grants us 3 stacks of Resolve, and it also spawns some plates that will do some additional damage. We're primarily using this for Resolve, which gives us a 25% increase to our armor. Stacks up 8 times. You lose a stack when you take damage. This is just a pretty big defensive increase. The top upgrade is Barrier Duration and Bonus. Extends a barrier duration to 12 seconds and increases the base amount of absorption to 60%. So now our barrier proc through our rune set will just be much larger. That's the main reason we're taking this. It will also last longer. I don't know if the one procced through our rune set lasts for 12 seconds, but primarily taking this for the increase of barrier. And then the bottom upgraded, we're taking Unstoppable. We are unstoppable after we cast Earthen Bulwark, so this will just be giving us Unstoppable. If you want some more damage and you don't have issues surviving, you can take Overpower. This will just grant you 2 stacks of Overpower. Overpower stacks up 4 times, 50% damage increase. It's only additive, so it's not that big of a damage increase, but it is a decent bit of more damage if you don't need the Unstoppable. Then we have our Cyclone Armor like we went over. We passively get this, so it will use itself when we're hit, and will passively gain the resistances even without this on our bar. And then the variant we're taking is all bonuses and damage from Cyclone Armor are increased by 100%. So primarily, this is the passive effect, so increase to all of our bonuses. This massively increases this. So now we just get a pretty massive increase to all resistances. Then the bottom gain an additional 20% bonus to resistances. So right now, without any additional points into Cyclone Armor, except from our gear, we get 73% increase to our resistances. Absolutely massive, completely passive. And then finally, we have one of our more actively used skills. This is Debilitating Roar. One of the big reasons we're taking this is because an item we're using gives us a big damage increase when this is active, and this just reduces the damage that enemies deal around us. The variant we're taking is all the bonuses and durations are increased by 50%. This is how we can have this up all the time, and this would just boost up any bonuses, so it makes enemies deal less damage and gives us some other effects. The left side upgrade, while this is active, we gain 30% bonus max life, pretty massive survivability increase. The right side increases the duration of Debilitating Roar by 1.5 seconds or 4.5 if you have Fortified. Will always be Fortified, so you have to add the 3 additional seconds from this while Fortified into the duration of the skill itself. The primary thing you want is the duration of this skill, and remember to add in the 3 seconds of this, to be longer or pretty much the exact same as the cooldown is of this. Now we could like reduce the cooldown and other things to get the damage reduction on enemies more often, but we primarily want this for the damage increase on us. So it's really the main thing you're going to be wanting. And then we're going down, we're taking our other toggleable passive skill. This is Hurricane. Usually just deals damage around you for 6 seconds, but with the Derecho variant, Hurricane has no cooldown and deals increased damage. Hurricane costs 15 spirit per second while active, and you can toggle it on and off. It also becomes a core skill, which we don't have much scaling for that anyway, but now this is a toggle exactly like Lightning Storm. It'll just do AoE around us, and because it's also a storm skill like all of our other skills, it also gets all the damage bonuses from our set. So this can multicast from the 5 set, and you'll see it'll actually just put hurricanes on the ground. It doesn't like multicast it on yourself, which kind of sucks, but it'll just put hurricanes on the ground. It can actually deal a decent bit of additional damage. It's not going to be like even close to our main damaging ability, but we get some other effects through this and more damage, which is nice. One of the big reasons we take this is actually weaken for the bottom upgrade. Enemies affected by a hurricane are now weakened, which means they deal less damage, which is 20 for normal enemies, 15 for elites, 10% for bosses. We're just more tanky. The top upgrade, we increase its critical strike chance just to deal some additional damage. You can also take the move speed increase if you really need that, but I think the crit's just going to be better. Hurricane can deal some decent damage. That's why we also have more points into this. And then for our big movement ability, we have Trample. Now the really cool thing about Trample is that if you make it a werewolf skill, it becomes a leap through the air. This leap is very good. You could jump through walls, you could jump over enemies, and the variant we're taking is Exsanguination. You can execute enemies, so low life enemies you can execute. It does some additional damage when you hit enemies with it and heals you, but we're primarily using this just us for the movement, but the healing and execute can come in handy. The top upgrade, it makes us unstoppable, primarily so if you ever get stunned, just use this to get out of it. Then we reduce the cooldown so we can just use it more. So it's a very, very good movement skill. Then we're going down to our ultimate, which is still seeming to be our main damaging ability. This is Cataclysm. You just pop it, it spawns twisters, lightning strikes things, does a ton of damage. But the variant is very good. Also make sure to make it a werewolf skill. But the variant is Severe Storm. Cataclysm spawns double the twisters and lightning bolts. So it basically just doubles the damage. In addition, lightning bolts have a 20% chance to spawn dancing bolts that also deal a decent amount of damage. So you pop this, you just do tons of damage. This will also kill stuff off screen. The top upgrade increases its duration. The bottom upgrade makes everything vulnerable. Now, on a side note, if you don't know this, through the sanctification system in the cube, if you use a specific rare resource with your necklace, you can get a second legendary aspect on your necklace. There is a legendary aspect you can roll to that makes all enemies vulnerable when you hit them with a storm skill, and it makes you deal multiplicatively increased damage to vulnerable enemies. It's very good to get. Currently in this build, my necklace is bugged. Some necklaces can bug where it removes that second roll on your necklace and it won't allow you to reapply a new one. So I'm currently bugged with my current necklace. This is why I have this. But if you could get that roll on your necklace, just take this off and you could put another point into another one of your skills. But if you need vulnerable, just use this. Enemies will always be vulnerable. Then we have our Paragon boards. For the first board, I'm taking Spirit, increase 2 critical strike damage. The secondary, enemies take increased damage from you stacking up when they get crit. The legendaries increase critical strike damage. The first board taking is Thunderstruck. Storm skills deal more damage, have a more crit chance, so just massive damage increases. The Glypher taking is Earth and Sky, bonus to magic nodes within range. Secondary is Nature skills do increase damage to vulnerable enemies. Legendaries increase nature magic damage. Then the next board we're taking is Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 Spirit, you deal increased damage. This will be procced 100% of the time, and your ultimate skills deal increased damage per spirit when cast. Now this is actually a pretty big part because I'm currently at 110 max spirit. So if I cast my ultimate when I'm at max spirit, I get 110% damage bonus. That's absolutely massive, but there is a weird quirk with how our tier set works with our toggleable skills. So our Hurricane and Lightning Storm. Now as we went over, the toggleable Lightning Storm and Hurricanes should cost spirit per second, but they actually don't. When you have our tier set that makes our storm skills not cost spirit, our toggleables actually don't use spirit even though they should. And they also don't proc the effect that drains all of our spirit when we use a storm skill that costs spirit. The only thing in our build right now that will actually use our spirit is Shred. Anytime we shred, it'll drain all of our spirit. This means before you're going to cast your ultimate, let your passive Hurricane and Lightning Storm hits build up your spirit, because we have a bunch of things that will build up its spirit. Get it max spirit, cast your ultimate, then go back to using Shred. And that will happen very quickly. If you're in a group of enemies and your Lightning Storm is hitting them, it'll fill up your spirit bar almost instantly. So just wait till your spirit's filled, cast your ultimate, get a massive damage boost from that, then go back to shredding. And then Shred will keep draining all of your spirit to give you a damage bonus. That's primarily how you're going to play that. Then the Glypher Tick is Electrocution, a damage bonus to lightning bolts and dancing bolts. The secondaries, enemies hit by dancing bolts or lightning bolts take increased damage from you. The legendaries increase the lightning damage. The next board is going to be Lustful Carnage. Crits with werewolf skills to restore 2 spirit and deal massively increased damage. This is a big way in which we restore our spirit. We will have both our Hurricane and our Lightning Storm generating this, so we can use our ultimate at full spirit. The Glypher Tick is Headhunter, a bonus to normal nodes within range. The secondaries increase damage to elites. Legendaries increase damage. And then the final board is going to be Constricted Tendrils, increase damage to poison enemies, a lucky hit that could poison enemies. And then the Glyph is Fulminate, increase lightning damage. You deal increased lightning damage to healthy and injured enemies. Legendaries increase lightning damage. And then for our spirit boons, we have Gift of the Stag for the max of 30 spirit increase. Again, this will be for our ultimate. So if you cast your ultimate in max spirit, this will be a 30% damage increase. We have Sight Talons, primarily for the critical strike chance increase, because crit's pretty important. The lucky hit is actually nice, specifically for getting our ultimate back. Then Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage. We have Calamity to extend our Cataclysm's duration. Then a Combo for the Storm, a lucky hit to reduce the cooldown of our Cataclysm, so we can hopefully be in Cataclysm 100% of the time. Then we have our Mercenaries. You could use whatever you want. If you're doing content that you won't die in, you can use Subo to track enemies. That's really nice for Hell Tides or a lot of content realistically. I'm just using it here right now, primarily because you get the 15% increased armor from this passive, or the 50% increased resistances over here. If you're doing harder content and you've been dying, you could do this for more survivability. The reinforcement I'm using is Oldkin, Fields of Languish. He basically just makes everything in an area get slowed and reduces their damage that they deal, and then you just put it on whatever ability you want. And then that brings us into our gear, starting with our gems. On your weapon, you want a lightning damage multiplier. On your jewelry, I'm just using diamonds for increase to all resistances. If you have a really low resistance, you can use a gem specifically for that. In one armor piece, we're using increase to willpower. In our other two, we have our rune sets. First off, we have Gar. Spend 25% of your primary resource. This will give you up to 10% crit chance. This will be active at all times in this build. Again, crit chance is a bit harder to get and very worthwhile. The other set is use 2 mobility or macabre skills. You do this 3 times, it'll cast Earthen Bulwark. Now, our shred is a mobility skill. So this will just constantly proc Earthen Bulwark on us. It'll also give the benefits of our upgrades because we are a druid. Massive defensive increase. But then we have our uniques and our mythics. We're actually only using 1 unique right now. This may change in a future version of the build. And we're using 1 mythic Air of Perdition. This just gives you a massive damage increase, and the stats are very good, especially the big crit chance increase. But core skills is good because our Hurricane and our Lightning Storm are core skills. A lot of the other stats on this are pretty decent, and just a massive multiplicative damage increase is impossible to beat on the helm slot. The other reason is Dark Howl. Debilitating Roar is now a werewolf skill, and Debilitating Roar increases your damage by up to 80% while in werewolf form for the duration. That is why we scaled up our Debilitating Roar duration, so now we get a massive damage bonus when that is active. Just a really big damage bonus, and it'll be up basically 100% of the time. Then for our legendary aspects on our weapon, while fortified, you deal up to 130% increased damage. Now keep in mind, this used to be based on how much fortify you have. This is just fortified. If you have any amount of fortify, which we will always be gaining fortify, you will have this massive damage bonus. Very good, just pure damage increase. On our necklace, deal up to 90% increased damage while you have barrier. We constantly proc our Earthen Bulwark, so that will just keep giving us barrier at all times for another massive damage increase. Also, like I mentioned, you can have a second legendary aspect on your necklace. If yours does a bug and remove it like mine did, just keep that in mind. Necklaces can bug like that, but I can have another, I think up to 25% multiplicative damage increase from that legendary aspect roll I talked about previously. Then our other 2 offensive aspects, lightning damage has up to a 50% chance to echo up to 75% of its damage to 2 close enemies. These echoes repeat on isolated targets. It essentially just creates these small chain lightnings that will do some amount of the damage. If it's a single target, it'll just repeat on that target, so just more damage. Then for our final, casting an ultimate skill increases your damage by up to 55% for 8 seconds, and you gain 2 additional ultimate ranks. The ultimate ranks are very good, and the first 8 seconds after you use your ultimate, you deal some pretty big damage increase as well. Then for our final offensive aspects, on your legs or your chest, you're going to want to gain 6% of your max life as fortify whenever you deal direct damage while berserking. Now, as we mentioned, shred gives us berserk anytime we use it. So anytime we deal direct damage, which I think is primarily shred, it'll just fortify us. This will be enough fortify to fortify us a lot of the point for a lot of our things, and we only need 1 point of fortify technically for our big damage increase to be active, and fortify will also give us a lot of healing. Then on our legs, get up to 30% DR while in werewolf. We'll always be in werewolf. Then finally on our boots, this is something that could change and may change in a future version of this build. Lightning damage is up to a 30% chance of stun for 1.5 seconds. We have so many different procs of lightning damage. This stuns bosses very quickly. Normal enemies, you're constantly CCing anyway because your tornadoes from Cataclysm CC, this will stun. But on bosses, you will see the stun meter fill up very, very quickly on bosses, and a lot of it is due to this. And like always, there will be a build planner in the description where I go over what is the most important stats, because the videos will just get way too long if I go over stats through a lot of these items. One of the most important things you really want to go for is get up your crit, which I think I need to reroll some rings to get some more crit. You want weapon damage as skilled up as you could possibly get on your weapon, any multiplicative. Crit strike multiplier is the biggest, all damage multiplier, Vaughn damage multiplier, and a lightning damage multiplier. Any of those are going to be massive damage increases. So that is the entirety of the second iteration of this build. Again, this build is so incredibly fun. It's very easy to farm Torment 10 once you get up to the progression like I am. If you min-max this build, you should be able to do Torment 10 pretty easily because of how hard it is to get some of the rolls, especially like unique rolls and stuff, much better. It is a bit hard to get like perfect rolls. If you legitimately got closer to like Abyss for this build, you could very much farm tier 12. But again, tier 10 is the most important milestone to get to. This build, as I have it right now, which is even close to being as strong as it could be, can farm tier 10 pretty easily and do pretty much all of the content, which is super good. And this build is just partially AFK for a lot of it because you have so much passive damage. Your Cataclysm kills like absolutely everything. So it is a very fun, very fast build to farm Torment 10. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.